joining us from the public, if you could keep your camera off except when you are speaking, if you are speaking, so that the members of the commission's faces are on our screen. Let's see. I think I will do roll call, and I'll call on folks based on who I see. So I'm Megan Roy. I'm the chair of the commission here as a former member of the Act 173 advisory group. Jay, I see you next.
Good morning, everybody. Jay Nichols, Executive Director of Vermont Principals Association. I'm the appointee of the Vermont Principals Association, and I see Jennifer on my screen.
Thanks, Jay. Good morning, Jennifer Deck Samuelson. I'm the chair of the Vermont State Board of Education. And I guess I will pass the baton to Oliver because I see him.
Oliver Olson. I'm the appointee of the Vermont Independent Schools Association, and I will pass the baton to Nicole Mace.
Hi, Nicole Mace. I'm a school board member from the Winooski School District, and I'm the representative of the Vermont School Boards Association. And I'll pass it over to Peter.
Hi, everybody. Peter Conlon, chair of the House Education Committee and appointed to the commission as a member of the House. And over to Secretary Saunders.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Zoe Saunders, Secretary of Education, and I will pass it over to Craig Bolio.
Hey, Craig Bolio, Tax Commissioner. I'll toss it over to Mike. Oh, Mike, we can't hear you, but you're not muted. A peculiar problem.
How about now?
Yes.
Okay. Mike Licklider, Superintendent, Harwood Unified Union School District, and I'm the appointee of the Vermont Superintendents Association. And I have trouble with my mics going back and forth between Zoom and Teams.
Elizabeth, do you want to go?
I'm Elizabeth Jennings. I am the Director of Finance for Addison Northwest School District, and I am the appointee from VASBO, the Vermont Association of School Business Officials.
Jeff Fannin, I think you might be the last one.
Okay, Jeff Fannin, Vermont NEA, appointee of Vermont NEA. So good morning, everybody.
Great. Thank you, everyone. So commission members, are there any amendments to our agenda for today? I think so. It's this is an sort of an extra off cadence meeting. So we're here to finalize our discussion about our preliminary report. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes from the December 2nd meeting?
So moved.
Thanks, Oliver. A second? Thanks,
Second.
Jennifer. Any discussion?
I had two substantive comments. One is on page 1, when Oliver suggested that the time might not be sufficient in moving the timing around, says there was agreement to making this change. I thought we agreed to not make that change, but I just wanted to check because I don't know if I'm misremembering.
Where are you speaking about again?
It's on the bottom of page 1, and Oliver had suggested that the report discussion item after the first public comment period is 30 minutes at the end of the meeting might not be sufficient. There was agreement to making this change. I don't remember that we changed the agenda to accommodate that request.
You're correct. We didn't change the agenda, but we expedited the discussion of the other topics, so we had more time. I think that's how we landed.
Okay. We might just want to delete there was agreement to making this change since we didn't agree.
Looks like Maureen's got that. Thank you.
Okay.
Did you have another one?
Oh, well, and then the other comment is on page, sorry, where did it go? On page 3, under the paragraph full commission's report to the General Assembly, the commission made a commitment to being very data driven and have moved quickly, but not quickly enough. My only thought there is I think we've moved quickly with the information that we've had available, and that it feels like a shortcoming that I don't necessarily feel that we need to be making or owning, because I feel like we have moved very quickly, but the deadline was not adequate for us to get the work done that was asked of us. So I would suggest making that change.
Yeah, I see a couple head nods. So I think it would just be I mean, we could say that the timeline hasn't allowed us to move quickly enough so that it's the timeline that's the issue as opposed to the group itself. Is that, I didn't
Yeah.
articulate that change very well. More, are you able to translate with that?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll fix that.
Great. Okay, so I think we have 2 minor edits. Anything else? All those in favor of approving the minutes with edits?
Aye.
Thank you. Any opposed? Any abstentions? I don't hear any, so we won't do a roll call. The minutes are approved. Okay, so we have an opportunity. We have 2 public comments opportunity, one now and one at the end of our meeting. I will say, because of today's tight agenda, if we have a long list of people, especially in this first portion, that we may need to use time limits. So I just ask that you keep your comments concise. And there is also an opportunity for written comments. And just a reminder to the public that this is not necessarily the opportunity for a back and forth conversation. The commission may get back to you individually or may take up your comments as it does its work. So I see one hand. And so Cheryl, Charles, I'll go ahead and start with you. Others, if you are interested in speaking, just raise your hand or turn your camera on. Thanks. Go ahead, Cheryl.
Great. Thank you so much, Commissioner Roy. Thanks to all the members of the commission for all of your efforts. My name is Cheryl Charles. I'm the chair of the Westminster Town School District Board, and I also chair the Wyndham Northeast Supervisory Union Board, the WNESU. And my comments today are directed to the important task you have of sending a report to the legislature. So as part of your process, you recently discussed a chart that had been developed by the Finance Committee, chaired by Emily Kornheiser. The basis for that chart was a brainstorming session, and brainstorming by definition is a process where all ideas are posted and none are evaluated for their merit, accuracy, or impact. And the version you discussed at your last meeting was an edited version, in which language about high fiscal impact was included without underlying analysis and evidence. And so some of you, commission members, expressed strong concerns that if the chart were included in that form, the brainstorm ideas would look like recommendations. And I think all of you have agreed that you're not supporting the list as a slate of recommendations. So if you do include the chart, I really urge you not to include the edited version. Give people access to the raw data, maybe through a link, because otherwise you're sharing or giving credibility to ideas that may have no merit and aren't demonstrating cost savings. Throughout your deliberations, and I heard that said again today, you have emphasized the importance of being data-driven and standing on the evidence. Please continue to do so. Continue to question assumptions. For example, like closing small schools and merging districts will save money. It's damaging and could potentially be irresponsible to make statements without accurate data and other supporting evidence. Please make sure that you have evidence to support whatever recommendations you ultimately develop, and show us, the public, the evidence that you're using. I think you're making progress in that area with documentation recently provided by the Agency of Education, and also members of the public, like Dr. Jeannie Albert, who provided data at your last meeting to demonstrate that merged districts are not saving significant monies and are actually spending more per equalized or weighted pupil on average than supervisory unions and unmerged districts. And looking ahead, there are rumors, at least, that you'll be exploring a foundation formula where a certain amount of money is provided to schools and districts throughout the state, and then locals, depending on their means, can add to it. That approach would appear to be in violation of the Vermont Constitution and would raise significant equity issues. So I, and I'm sure many others, respectfully urge you to continue to exercise caution and care, that you're standing on accurate data, Vermont-specific research, and other rigorously obtained evidence with any statements or recommendations that you make. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cheryl. Any other members of the public? I don't see hands. Oh, I do see one hand. Elizabeth Burrows, go ahead.
Just a very brief question, and that is, where can we find all of these documents? I don't see them on the commission main page, and it's a it's a little bit hard to navigate. Thank you.
I can just give a clerical answer to that question. I'm not exactly sure what you mean by documents. If you mean the current draft report, I believe, Maureen, that is posted with the meeting, with the agenda as a meeting material.
Yep.
Great, thank you. And we'll talk about this. I'll actually wait to talk about this when we get there. The commission will need to talk about the working document of the finance committee if it does, and frankly, even if it doesn't decide to include it in the report, because folks will ask where that is. But I'll get to that when we're discussing. Okay, I so not see any additional hands. I'm gonna keep us moving. So we are on to our discussion, and then we will. The goal is to make a motion to adopt a final report to the General Assembly. First, there was a revised draft sent out yesterday, and I just wanted to see if there's any members of the commission who needed a few minutes right now to read through that draft. And it's okay if you do. So are there any folks that need a few minutes to read through it?
I do, but continue on and I'll read as we go.
Okay. I think if you want to zero in on this two sections, it's the preliminary data findings, and then there is some suggested changes on the policy considerations. That's had lots of titles, but those are the two sections. I believe, Zoe, that's right. Right. Yeah. Okay,
Yes.
but you're okay with us moving forward, Jeff? Okay. Okay, so based on our December 2nd meeting, I think there are two primary elements of the report we need to finalize, and I'm proposing that we start with those two concepts. The first is whether or not to include the Finance Subcommittee's working document. We did, at the end of the December 2nd meeting, agree that if it is included, it would not be in the sort of cleaned up format. It would be as is. That was a discussion that was had at December 2nd. Again, that's an open question. So we need to have a conversation about including or not including the working document. And the second is we should have a conversation about the recommendation section. We technically looked at that, but I don't believe we had any kind of in-depth discussion. So those are the two areas that I think that we need to have discussion on. The steering group did move its meeting. They meet after this to do a final sort of edit wordsmithing through. So I'm going to suggest that we not focus on that. So I think it's those two issues. Does anyone else have anything of substance that they want to make sure that we talk about? So I saw Jay's hand and then I saw John. Jay, go ahead.
Mine's not about anything else of substance. So if you're asking that question, mine was about the first two.
Okay, great. We'll get to it.
Okay.
John, go ahead.
Good morning, everybody. Again, thanks to everybody for all this hard work. And I apologize if I'm throwing things out there at the last minute that caused some problems. So my two concerns. One is regarding the recommendations. I feel strongly, based on the way the legislation is written and our charge, that we are really obligated to provide some concrete recommendations. I do know that we provide some general recommendations. I would sort of refer to them as more encouragement, which I think are important. And I think it's important we put those things out there. But I do think we should revisit the idea of providing several, actionable recommendations. The other section that I felt I have real great concerns about is including the brainstorming. Again, not to be dismissive of the hard work that went into the Finance Committee's deliberations and considerations and aggregating all of that information. I do think it's an important document. I think it continues to be a guiding document for us as a commission. I think it obviously is a public document and that people have access, but I do worry about including it in the report because right now, the way the report is written, I think we create somewhat of a contradiction because in one sense, we keep saying it is not recommendations, but in the other way, we say in order to give the General Assembly the broadest possible list of potential solutions. I think that's a direct, contradiction. How can we say it's not recommendations, but we're giving you the best list of all possible solutions? And then we go on to explain the way the document is formatted and organized. I think that certainly gives a certain legitimacy. Up front, it says it's not an endorsement of any. And what I come away with is it becomes an endorsement of all. And I think that's not what we want to say. Again, I do think that's an important document. I do think we will continue to explore many of those considerations and eventually make some long-term recommendations in our final report. But I would be very concerned about including them in the report as it is now. Thank you.
So John, I'm not sure if you might not have caught, those are the two items. All I was doing is making sure that it wasn't anything else that folks want to make sure we talk about. So we'll be able to talk about both of those things kind of in turn. I'm going to start with the second piece that you started with, which is the conversation. And we did a similar thing at our December meeting. I'm going to ask us to do it again so that every member of the commission has an opportunity to share their thoughts. And where the conversation has centered is about whether or not to include the working document of the finance subcommittee. The version that you have, actually, I'll take this in slightly two steps. The version of the report that you first saw before Zoe's rewrite has a reframed summary section of that part that just basically explains that these are not recommendations. This is a status update. It is written as if it is included. Zoe's draft offers a version of that statement that would be used if we don't include it. So I think as you go through your comments, that's what you are going to zero in on. But the core question is, as a commission member, and I'm going to go around just like we did on the second and have everyone share their thinking, without trying to recap, because I'm sure people will recap it in their comments, it's essentially, is it important and instructive for this commission to show the General Assembly and the legislators all of the things that have been raised, acknowledging that we don't have recommendations, and therefore include the working document and be very clear that it's a working document, or simply reference that working document exists, but don't include it in the final report? That's essentially this question. So I'm going to go around. I'll just call folks based on the order that I see them on my screen, and then I will make sure we don't miss anyone. We'll open it up for general conversation after that, but I would like to make sure. So the first part is limiting it to, do we or do we not include the working document of the Finance Committee? I see Elizabeth. You are first on my screen. My screen keeps moving, so I don't know why. Sorry.
That's okay. I am in support of keeping the document attached as an appendices, the full working document. And my biggest thought about this as I look at the language is whether or not we reference it and don't include it, or we include it and reference it, is not a huge difference. However, I think it just makes it more difficult for them to find the document. You know, not that it's not available, but if we're going to reference it, if we're going to talk about it at all and share it in this memo, then it doesn't make sense not to include it, as far as I'm concerned.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Oliver, you're next on my screen.
Yeah, I'll reiterate the concerns I've raised before, which is we've, as a full commission, have had no discussion about any of these ideas. So I don't support. I don't support including it at all.
Thanks, Oliver. Mike, you are next.
Thanks, Megan. And my preference has been to include it as a brainstorming document, just to make it easier for people to find and see, knowing that as a commission, we're not endorsing it. I will say that in this, I would certainly go along with the consensus of the group, if that's to not include it. And I would then endorse the edit that Secretary Saunders made. I think that's a good compromise, but I would want to make sure that it's easily accessible to the point made in public comment earlier.
Thanks, Mike. Jeff Bannon, you're next.
Trying to catch up. I do not think we should put it in there. I agree with Oliver that it can be a working document that we use later on and look at particular issues, but putting in there now will give it some tacit endorsement of some kind to some people, which is not appropriate and not at all what we've discussed. And so I'm not in favor of just putting in attached to our report ideas that we haven't vetted, haven't discussed, haven't analyzed in any shape, manner, or form, truly. And so it doesn't mean we can't use the document going forward, and perhaps we should use some of those ideas and look at those. But putting in such ideas in attaching to our report to the legislature, which may give some people the wrong idea, I think is perhaps dangerous and certainly not advisable at this point. So I can't support it.
Thanks, Jeff. Jay, you're next.
I think we do keep the document attached as an appendix. I think this speaks to transparency that has been a concern by some advocates. I don't want anybody to think we're trying to hide anything. I think we need to be as transparent as possible in everything we do. We are not recommending any of these ideas as a commission, so I don't have any reservation with sharing it. I think in some people's eyes, it would be inappropriate not to share it. I think we want to make everything as above board and as transparent as possible. I worry about it looking like we're not open to all ideas. We don't share it. And again, we're not recommending any of these ideas. There's some ideas in here that actually counter each other. And there's some ideas here that I would never support. But I think we want to have as open a process as possible.
Thanks, Jay. Jennifer?
Thanks. So I am not in favor of including it. And really for two additional reasons. One, based on our last meeting from 2 weeks ago, I read a few different news articles that even though we were very clear at that meeting that these were not recommendations, the news articles were presenting them as if they were. And I think something's being lost in translation here, and I'm just worried that this is going to take on a life that we don't intend for it. And my second concern is that there are other suggestions that have come out in public comment that are not included on this list, and therefore this list is incomplete. And I think it elevates what the subcommittee has done kind of at the expense of the broader comments that we've gotten from the public. So that doesn't feel fair to me. So I would not include it. And I think, with regard to the transparency, I think we need to post it, maybe not even under the Ed Finance subcommittee, but post it kind of higher up and make note that this is a working document, and then, have that accessible so that people can follow along with the work that we're doing.
Thanks, Jennifer. Nicole?
So I agree with the points around transparency and in terms of making this stuff. Someone said earlier today, it's hard to find this document. What are you even talking about? So, but I am concerned that this decision is sort of fracturing what is otherwise a pretty broad consensus among this group that is reflected in the body of this report, which is that this is complex work that has a lot of overlapping features, and picking any single one policy to address a crisis is inappropriate. And so I didn't have a lot of time to dig into Secretary Saunders' edits last night, but I'm generally supportive in the framing because I think it, number one, gives us a lot more data meat, which I think it's not great for us to say we don't have data, we haven't looked at data, we've actually seen a lot of data. And so I'm appreciative of the breadth of information captured in the report that way. And I'm also appreciative of the future policy considerations, those 3 bullet points around revising the funding formula, creating scale, and aligning staffing to enrollment. To me, those are 3 policy buckets that are certainly worth more of this group's work, focus, attention over the coming year than a menu of ideas that were generated, some of which will never even work. Some might get at one piece of the puzzle, but are not the kind of comprehensive policy framework that this commission was tasked to provide. So I want the members of the public to be able to access that document, but do not feel strongly that it be included within the report. I'm not willing to sort of force a vote that would, have people not being able to endorse the report as a whole because of that.
Thanks, Nicole. Zoe, you're next. Sorry.
Good morning, everyone. I suggest excluding the list. I did offer some revised language should the commission decide to go that direction. I voiced my reservations at the last commission meeting with including the list. I think that for this level of a report, it's really critical that we're intentional around what is included and what we're elevating to the forefront of the conversation. I think we've all acknowledged that the list is not ready yet to be reviewed as a set of recommendations. And as many have noted, some of the ideas are contradictory. And so it's challenging to consider that list as a starting point for policy considerations. I know we've been really thoughtful and hardworking around trying to reframe that section as ideas and as a brainstorm. But since the last commission meeting, I've had a lot of opportunity to be part of a couple additional public engagement sessions through our Listen and Learn tour and through other events. And I think it's just reinforced for me that the public will interpret this as a set of policies. And it will be problematic thing for us to include it as an appendix because it will take on a level of importance that I don't think we subscribe to at this point. I do agree that it is a working document and that we want to have transparency. Everything is fully available in the public and in our minutes. And I think that's the right place for it at this time until we're able to fully vet every recommendation and ensure that the commission has weighed in on the ideas that have been presented.
Thanks, Zoe. Peter?
Thanks. I do support this being part of the report for exactly the reasons that both Elizabeth and Jay outlined, both if we're going to reference it, let's have it available, and for transparency. But whenever sort of these bigger questions come up, I always go back and read the act itself. And if we go back and look at it, it says that one of the requirements of this commission is to provide a written report containing its preliminary findings and recommendations, including short-term cost containment considerations for the 2025 legislative session. And I see this document as fulfilling that requirement in the law. So for that reason, I support it.
Thanks, Peter. Craig?
Yeah, I support Zoe's edits. I had a similar sort of reaction as Jennifer, where I had leaned towards including it at the last meeting, and then it started hearing some conversations and news articles that were outside the commission that were not necessarily looking at it in the way that we had intended. And so I am also growing concerned that the conversation may start to spiral a little out of control in a way that we don't intend it to if it's in there.
Thanks, Craig. Who did I feel like I've missed one person. John, sorry, you kind of kicked us off. That's why I didn't mean to skip over you. Go ahead.
No, I jumped the gun. I already had my chance. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, John. I'll just share my thoughts, not as chair, but just as a member. I think the part of this conversation that resonates most with me is Nicole's comments around not creating a fracture in this commission at this time. My biggest concern that I've shared pretty often is the credibility of the commission. And I will say, I actually believe, as an individual member of this commission, that it is more credible to be transparent, and transparent would mean showing all of them. So I don't believe that's a problem. I think people are smart enough to read things as what they are. I also have read news articles and am concerned about that. But regardless of that, I think that we are stronger as a commission if we can represent consensus. We may not be able to get to consensus on individual policy recommendations, and we know we will not be able to get there, but this feels like not necessarily the hill to die on for me. That, I guess that would be my comment. I actually do think that it's useful. I also heard the chair of our finance subcommittee talk about, as a legislator, this will be useful and important, and frankly, it will be used regardless. So given that, it sort of reinforces that it may not be worth being a fractured commission around it. I do believe that it is important, and actually I would say this even if we weren't debating putting this in. This is actually might be an ask of our note takers. We commission members have the Ed Finance Committee's working document version. I'm not sure that version is anywhere in our notes. And I don't know what the easiest way to do that. It probably is every time, if the Finance Committee continues to use that grid, that they include the current version in the minutes. I think that is important. And that way, even with the report that we have, if people want to go read it, they will access it on the Finance Subcommittee's section of the website. So I also think that, I'll just close my individual comments. Oliver, go ahead. I was going to say one more thing, but go ahead.
I just reflecting on a comment that Jennifer just made, and I want to sort of elevate it because I think it's important, and that is that we have received a fair amount of public comment and suggestions, and I think if the Finance Committee is going to continue with this brainstorm approach with the ethos that everything's on the table, I do think as a commission, we have an obligation to ensure that those ideas that are provided by the public go into that brainstorming list, because otherwise it does appear that, we have all heard, feels like a million times, a suggestion that, consolidating, supervisory unions is going to save, a ton of money. We just got public comment about that again, but it's not anywhere on the brainstorming list, right? So I feel like whether or not we agree with these ideas, if it's truly a brainstorm, we should be taking that public comment and putting it into that document.
Jay, go ahead.
Navigating teams here. I just want to say, I find myself agreeing with Oliver a lot. I disagree with him 100% on this one. I think the commission takes in input from our members, from what we hear in the public, and it's like a representative democracy. We decide what we think the recommendations of the commission should be. And we do that based on input from the public and input from our own experiences and our members. I don't think it's one of those things where just whoever calls with this squeakiest voice automatically gets something put into a brainstorm. And again, I'm with Nicole and you, Megan, and other people. I don't think this has to derail our work. If we agree to disagree and we decide the majority rules one way or the other, then that's fine. If we're going to do that, then we need to talk about what that language is going to look like. So for example, if we're not going to have the stuff in, then I'd want to go through Zoe's rewrite sentence by sentence so that everybody has a chance to see that and talk about it.
Thanks, Jay. Jennifer, and then Zoe.
Yeah, I'll just quickly respond to that, Jay, because and that wasn't what I was suggesting, that anyone who raises an idea gets put on the spreadsheet. But I guess my point is that there are ideas that have been raised, and to my knowledge, the Ed Finance Committee has not discussed whether to put those ideas on the spreadsheet. So I think there should be at least a conversation and an opportunity for consideration for other ideas other than the ones that have emanated from the Ed Finance Committee. So that was my point. I just wanted to clarify that. Thanks.
Yeah, and mine as well. So
Zoe, go ahead.
I appreciate the conversation on the importance of building consensus and supporting our future collaboration in this space. I want to offer also that we can continue to work on that brainstorming list. I'm hearing that there's a strong desire and interest of all the commission members to dig in deeper there and to flesh it out further. I do think the point is well taken that there are some additional ideas that have come up that are not included on that list. And so maybe we work as a commission to establish a commitment of when we will vet those ideas and the process for doing so, because the commission has many opportunities to provide input to the General Assembly. I would ask that we engage in that conversation as well, assuming that this would be helpful. What would be our process to further vetting that so that it's at a place we feel like we could share with the commission with some recommendations on and prioritization of what to focus on first.
Thanks, Zoe. Mike, and then Peter.
Thank you. And I have similar comments. I look forward to the new year and being able to start diving deeper into the data we have, including the spreadsheet and the ideas brainstormed. They were ideas brainstormed by Education Finance Committee members, not public, but we do receive a lot of public comment. So maybe that would be something the steering committee could discuss. Do we want to generate another document that lists ideas that come through from the public so that we don't have to go through dozens and dozens of emails? So that's one piece. But then I do also look forward to the work plan for the new year so that as a commission, we can start taking some of the work generated in the individual subcommittees. And I understand too that we'll have 2 additional subcommittees in the for consideration from what was originally laid out in the work plan. So just look forward to diving deeper in the new year.
Thanks, Mike. Peter?
Thanks. If we don't include this document, is part of what we're submitting, does it live up to the statutory obligation to provide cost containment considerations for the General Assembly? Which is, again, we have a commission and we have a subcommittee whose task it is to come up with these. And by gathering public input, I agree with Jay, it's sort of like a representative democracy. It's not a free-for-all. Our task is to provide these cost containment considerations. We have them. Why we wouldn't provide them, I guess I'm a little stuck on. I think that if our concern is that the press is getting it wrong and therefore the public is getting it wrong, I guess I'm a little concerned that we're going to let those considerations drive our work rather than doing the work that we're statutorily obligated to do.
Thanks, Peter. I think that's a fair question for us to wrestle with, because I think the credibility of the commission is really important. I've heard concern about the credibility of this commission come from both concerns about credibility coming from including it and concerns about credibility from not including it. And I also would just reinforce that it is a document being discussed at open meetings and therefore needs to be on our website in public, which we also kind of recognize it's not. So we will remedy that. But because of that, to your point, Peter, it's out there, it's not secret. So what is are we sort of debating? It may be an odd thing to debate. Okay, I saw some hands go down because they might have been left over. Other things to discuss.
Just have a question. It was brought up. I mentioned about including a public document that lists the input we've received. Are there substantial pieces of information? This would be helpful, I think, at the Ed Finance Committee. I've heard some people say that there are items that were not included on the list. I think that would be important if people feel there's something that should be to let the Ed Finance Committee know. I'd be curious to know what they specifically are.
Yeah, I would just piggyback on that. I thought, for example, the district size has been part of that conversation. I might not be putting my eyes on it in the document. Go ahead, Nicole.
Sorry. A lot of what's on the Ed Finance Committee's brainstorm document, I would say, would not be considered short-term cost containment. So I think part of the trouble we ran into is that the work of this commission standing itself up really and organizing itself and collecting preliminary data coincided with the budget process for FY26. And so the timing, which we address, does not really lend itself to, am I getting?
Yeah, members of the public, thank you.
So I wonder whether we could be more direct about that really the only options for there's no cost containment other than the work that the work that boards are doing and have done throughout this budgeting process. The December 1 letter, I think ed spending growth was lower than some thought it might be this year. It's still higher than inflation, but not as big as it was last year. So if the question is property tax relief, then there's a pretty short menu of options. John shared some ideas in a memo we got this morning, but we haven't talked about those. So I think it's just as hard at this point to start to say, with an hour left in this meeting, let's go through and evaluate some things that could actually have an impact on FY26. So I think, Peter, that's where I'm struggling a little bit, is that in the process of the Finance Committee going through that brainstorm, much of what we landed on was this isn't going to impact FY26. It's really new revenue or moving things out of the ed fund, right? Or general fund transfer in or transfer out to the general fund that is going to impact FY26 property tax. And so we can say that more concretely in the report and respond to the cost containment considerations that way. But much of what was laid out in that spreadsheet isn't going to do a thing for FY26. It could be acted upon this legislative session, but that's different from short-term cost containment.
Zoe, did you want to go? Yeah, go ahead.
I agree with Nicole's sentiment. I think it's the commission looked at a number of short-term cost containment strategies and then recognized that there was really limited impact for this current year beyond what had already been communicated both through the associations and I think through the governor as well, and really made an intentional shift to think about these broader, longer-term strategic strategies. And naming that as a finding could be helpful. I think in the report we acknowledge a number of the recommendations that have been put into place to help curb spending and this current year, and that the commission is redirected to focusing on those longer term strategies.
Thanks, Zoe. Jennifer?
Yeah, I'll just echo Nicole and Zoe. I think it would be helpful to go through that thought process in our report to say that the Ed Finance Committee did look at any short-term cost containment options and came to the conclusion that there really weren't any, and that they put the focus more on long-term strategic solutions. And maybe that helps to address, Peter, your concern that the report asks for short-term cost containment recommendations and there aren't any, but it might be helpful just to explain why and how we got there. Thanks.
Just to clarify, it asked for considerations, not recommendations.
Yeah, sorry.
Oliver and then Jeff.
So I agree with Nicole's sentiment as well. I think realistically, again, I'm going to just put in another plug for the idea that I've put forward a couple of times now. That is the only thing realistically that we can do as a commission that's going to have any impact on next year's tax rates would be some sort of a target that we put out there as a recommendation that school districts and independent schools hold spending increases below a certain level. We obviously can't mandate it, but we can put it out there as a recommendation for short-term cost containment with a target. Not everybody's going to meet it, but if we put a target out there, at least as folks are finishing up the budgeting process, we can get everybody working towards a common goal. And I think that's the only thing that we can actually do with this report.
Just going to make a quick agenda clarification before going to you, Jeff. If we are deciding to engage in a conversation about recommendations that are not already in this draft, that's next. Right now, it's just, are we including or not? Because I suspect that even that, Oliver, is something that commission members have opinions about. So Jeff, and then I'm going to just see where we are related to this issue.
Sure. I think I think there are some short-term cost-saving measures in there. For example, the Oliver Wyman report talked about reference-based pricing, saving potentially a lot of money. And I think there's another report coming out from the Green Mountain Care Board, maybe today or this week or something, I understand, so soon, that I would hazard a guess would save, tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars potentially statewide. And you and I, Nicole, had some exchange a month or so ago about reference-based pricing. I do think there's a way to apply that sooner rather than later we could ask the Department of Financial Regulation to do a mid-year premium rate adjustment if the legislature were to enact reference-based pricing ASAP. So I think that's a sizable, since we talk about the last 3 years, the news reports were 33% increases in education spending, but what was not said was that healthcare costs went up 48% in that same 3-year period, and that has not been addressed. And so I think we need to address it. I think healthcare costs are about half of the increase this year, potentially. And so let's address half of that. And I think that could be a short-term consideration to respond to your comments, Peter, about what could we recommend. So I think there are some things there. I'm just nervous about putting all these recommendations in there. That's the totality that gives me pause, but I certainly do think there are specific things we should put in the mix.
I'm just going to remind us, we don't have time in 37 minutes, because what you're talking about, Jeff, is a line by line, include this but not that. And I think we've already sort of come to the conclusion it's either in as a working document or it's not. We are going to talk about recommendations. A few people have put things proposed, so let's talk about that in a second. But right now, Nicole, go ahead, and then I'm going to see where we are.
That's fine. It would just be back and forth on
Okay.
specific, so we don't need to go down that road.
Okay, so what I think that I'm hearing there is without counting, because I don't actually think that's instructive for us to count, but without counting, we fall on both sides of this issue, but in the ensuing conversation, I'm hearing more of a willingness to say that the working document does not need to be included in the report. My side comment to that is, I think we need to put it up on the website in a prominent area under the finance subcommittee so that the public can access it. So my question would be, Zoe's draft put forth some summary language that explains basically that this exists, that we stopped short of including it in this report. And is there commentary on that language? Because it's feeling like we're leaning toward that most recent version of the report, which does not list the grid, but does explain it. And to Jay's point earlier, let's make sure we feel comfortable with that language. Nicole.
Yeah, I'm generally supportive of Zoe's edits, as I said earlier. I'm just wondering about including a link to the document in the report. The report links to all kinds of documents that we've looked at, and so I think it would be I don't know, treating that document differently than all the other documents that we referenced in the report by not linking to it. And again, in the interest of accessibility and transparency, I think that would be my recommendation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. And this is a clarifying question. I think, Mike, you and Emily hold the most recent version from the December 9th meeting. And then, so let's just make sure this has to happen either way, because it either needs to be under the finance committees. And then once it is reflected under the finance committee, then Maureen, this document, our report, can link to the finance committee's materials. So that's a logistical clarifier. Oliver.
Just before we get into talking about Zoe's document, is this posted out? I'm looking out for members of the public who might be looking for this document.
I don't know. Maureen, did last night's version get put in with the materials? Oh, sorry, you're muted, which might be me. I muted the room earlier when there was an echo. That's my fault. Sorry.
So no, last night's version, excuse me, hasn't been posted as far as I know, but I can get it up there soon, so.
Okay.
I think it might be helpful to post that and also maybe put it in the chat so people can download
the
it.
chat's not usually active for this meeting.
I'm concerned that we're talking about a document that's not available to people in the public, so.
Yep, so it'll be up as soon as we can, and it's essentially the same conversation. I'm agreeing with you, but it's the same conversation about the working document for the finance committee. So Mike, go ahead.
I just wanted to answer your question that yes, I have the current version that I can share, but also I would agree with Nicole that if we're not going to include it in the report, it should be prominent, and it should also be referenced, either linked or referenced to where you can find it in the in our preliminary report.
Okay. And I think what our practice been is that the various drafts are found in the meeting materials, so basically attached to the agendas of the meeting in which they're discussed. So obviously last night's, it's going to take a little while. I just want to give credence again to the fact that that came last night is not because of a lack of transparency, is because people are working over the weekend to generate it. And I think members of the public should give grace. I know most of you probably caught the email thread, but you're not obligated to catch a thread that comes out on Sunday night, which also means that the people that post things into our agenda materials should not be required to do that. So if it's not there, it is not because we're attempting not to be transparent. It's because people are working really hard on the weekend to push a report out. So I think where we are circling around, and then I do want to surface people's comments, not about linking, but about Zoe drafted a couple of paragraphs in that policy consideration section. I want us to feel comfortable with that language. And then just summarizing, the most recent version that Mike has will be linked to the Finance Subcommittee's discussion from December 9th. And then a link to that is what will be reflected in the report, because that would be accurate. It's linking to a live working discussion document. Mike, did you have more, or is that just your previous hand? Okay, Peter, go ahead.
Perhaps just looking for a little clarification. We are talking about the language that begins with initial policy exploration.
I think so. I have it up. I'm going to scroll down. It's after the preliminary. Yes. So this would be page 12 of the draft that Zoe shared last night.
Okay.
I think, Zoe, that's where the new language is, right? Some of it's old, some of it's new.
Did you say I can or can't talk about linking to documents?
Go ahead, Peter. I probably shouldn't tell anyone they can't talk about something.
Just to say that obviously this references the document in many ways, and I do believe that there should be a link there. And frankly, you know, I would like to see us come out with a consensus approval of this document. And if there's a link to the document in this section, I'd feel, you know, fine supporting the document as a whole.
Thank you. And I think where that would go is, well, in here, several places it references a working document. I think it would be pretty easy for the working document language to become a link, I think is what you're saying. Oliver, go ahead.
Just a suggestion is, would it be possible to put the document on the screen so that we're all looking at it and the public are all looking at it at the same time?
Yep, I think I can share. I will do that. I can't see folks, so just so you know, we are on page 12 of the draft. I know this is imperfect, but I'm not going to open it any different way because I'm afraid that I will lose it. So it's retitled Initial Policy Exploration. There's some explanation of why these are not recommendations. And then what we are proposing is that that in various places, not that it needs to be overly linked, but for example, right there, it says working document. That's where a link could go. John and then Jennifer.
Thank you, Megan. I still have some reservations about, I think this helps move things in the right direction, but still have reservations about the statement in there says, in order to give the General Assembly the broadest possible list of potential solutions. So again, I feel like that's still an endorsement that that is a list of solutions, that those are potentially recommendations. And I also think the bulleted section that sort of furthers that, you know, that these are, you know, considered policy actions, right? Using these different ideas. So again, I very much believe that the document has to be accessible to the public, accessible to the legislature, clearly we need to indicate that these are not recommendations. And I just still feel that there's a couple of still some contradictions in the way we're presenting the information. Thank you.
John, Jennifer, and then Zoe.
Thanks. Well, it's funny. I can see my email to you on the screen.
Sorry.
That's okay. Well, I had two comments about that second paragraph that I'm just going to throw out for the committee, and then I can go more slowly. But my suggestion to Megan was, so it's the second paragraph that begins, a brainstorm process was conducted separately by both the finance subcommittee and the full commission. And then my suggestion is to delete "this was done," continue that sentence. So it would, and the full commission to surface a large number of ideas, many that have been considered in the past, period. And then my other recommendation was to tack on a sentence at the end of that paragraph that says, further ideas have surfaced in, sorry, I'm trying to read my own handwriting. Further ideas have surfaced in subsequent meetings of the commission during public comment, but the commission has not had the time to consider these ideas in light of newly available data.
Thanks. Zoe, did you want to go?
I was just going to clarify where I made some adjustments, but I feel like we're past that in the conversation.
I should have started with that. Sorry. John, is that a new hand or from before?
Sorry, forgot to put my hand down.
It's okay. So I'm looking at the time. I'm going to stop my sharing because I can't see you all. Sorry. I believe that, go ahead, Zoe.
Through this conversation, I had an additional question that emerged for me in terms of our intent and the goals for what we'll provide to the General Assembly. I do think it's important for us to start our work and analysis with the broadest list of potential solutions. But I think when we make a recommendation to the General Assembly, our goal would be to be more focused, having done some further vetting and review. So I do think that's a point that we should consider as a commission in terms of really defining the goals and what we hope to deliver to the General Assembly.
So I think that's an important point, Zoe, and I think what I want to offer is we will take one fell action at the end. So I'm not suggesting, although you could decide, someone could put a motion on the table, but I want to summarize where I think we are so that we have an opportunity to talk about the recommendation section, which currently has two things, and a few members have wondered about whether or not it should have more. Understanding that we're not going to try an in-depth vetting, but we are going to try to see if there are some more things the commission wants to list. But where I think we are related to we are not cutting and pasting the working document into this report. We are linking the working document to this report so that it's very clearly connected to the work of the Finance Committee. I think that Zoe has done a good job of explaining in here what we mean. I have heard some, I don't like how this is worded. And so respectfully, I would like to propose that we allow the steering group to make those final wordsmithing changes, because I think we're in agreement, or at least can live with, I think, the bulk of what we've talked about. Sounds like we can tighten up some language, maybe replace the words action with insert softer word. But I'd like to propose that we let the steering group do that. It is hard to wordsmith with 13 people. It's also hard to wordsmith with 6, but I think that we can probably get there. Zoe, maybe you have a brilliant idea that you're just going to put in the room.
No, and I'm not going to suggest we do wordsmithing as a whole group, but I would just recommend that whatever framing we agree on within the written report, We include that framing on the grid document as well, so that it does stand alone and there's consistency in terms of understanding those ideas that are being represented. And I think calling out as well that there's some additional ideas that may not have come into this planning document as of yet.
Yeah, thank you. And John, I'm also thinking too, that bulleted list is just meant to clarify the things the finance committee is talking about related to those things. And is there a way that we could say that? That's another thing from like a wordsmithing. I'm not trying to diminish the comments by saying it's wordsmithing because it's substantive. I'm just trying to avoid us doing it as a full group.
I'm comfortable with that.
Great, thanks. Okay. I will wait until the end for a full motion, but it feels as though we have agreement on this piece. And I appreciate the conversation. I think, again, just to reiterate, we are a more useful body the more we can attempt or strive for consensus. So the second piece is the current recommendation section does two things right now. I'd like to discuss those two things, and there's some proposals by members that could it say a few more, understanding we do not have a lot of time to re-vet ideas. But the first thing that this section attempts to show, and maybe I should put this, I'm going to scroll to it and then share so people can see what I'm doing. Jennifer, I didn't mean to highlight your email. It's just, that's where it is in the thread, and my email links
fine.
these all together. And I really am afraid to close this box because I will lose it. So essentially, this first recommendation is actually just about recognizing that the legislature is talking as if it will move fast, and I think we can expect that it will move fast. And they have also created this commission, and it's sort of a try to avoid parallel processes recommendation. But that's what that first recommendation is. And the second recommendation related to that is this commission, by charge and also by our own design, seeks to have a lot of community engagement. We've talked about the limitations and who sits at this table. And so it's just sort of elevating the community engagement element of this and signaling that this commission can be a body that does that, perhaps in a way that the legislature cannot. So that's the summary of the two current, stopping my share, of the two current things in the draft. So I'd like to get thoughts on that from the commission. I'm not going to go around this time. People can just raise their hand. And then John certainly, but others have put in potential other things that this section could include. Nicole.
Thanks. I just wanted to check in with Zoe on one of the edits that you suggested. I'm looking at a track changes version. I don't know if other people had that version, but when I open it up in Google Docs, that's how it comes up for me. So the last sentence in the second paragraph under the community engagement section, we believe it is important for the General Assembly to use the commission as the body it created to bring important perspectives to this work. You suggested deleting that sentence, and I'm just interested in why. I don't want to make assumptions.
Sorry to interrupt, but Megan, would you mind putting the document back up on the screen just so everybody can see it?
Well, what I'm trying to do is find the track changes version because the one I showed just has it deleted. So keep talking, and I am working on that. I'm going to open it up in Word and show it. So keep going.
I'm looking at what Zoe sent last evening, and it has track changes in it, Megan.
Yes, I understand that. That's what I'm trying to share. The version I had on my screen didn't show the track changes.
I didn't make a track change on that sentence. In that section, I made updates under the continue to ensure substantive, equitable community engagement under the second paragraph to show the alignment with the Listen and Learn tour and to make some distinctions between that body of work and the commission's body of work.
So one assumption I made was that you thought that the content was addressed somewhere else, but on the track versions document that I see, it says that you deleted that sentence. That's why that you suggested it be replaced with different language. So I don't.
I mean, I'm looking at my version on the screen here, and I didn't include track changes there, but let me just see the version that maybe I'm looking at a previous version I sent. Hold on, let me just.
It's not a big deal. I just wanted to make sure there wasn't a substantive disagreement about the role of the commission vis-a-vis both the General Assembly's process and our link to the community in terms of building political will for any substantial changes to our education delivery and funding system. Yeah.
I think it shows up as deleted probably, Zoe, because you reworded it and the track changes.
Oh, I see. So you
Yeah.
are referencing this. Yes, I reworded that section. And mainly the intent there was to clarify the role of the Listen and Learn and distinguish that from the commission's work, but to be intentional around describing the synergy that we tried to create to ensure that data and learning could also support the commission's work. And then I just made some editing changes in terms of outlining the differences. And
that was my assumption. I didn't want to make an assumption, but I wanted to just be clear that from your perspective or from the administration's perspective, it's not that the General Assembly shouldn't use the commission to engage the public in various ideas that are being explored. It is stated in other places in this document that the commission can play a role, et cetera, et cetera. So I just want to make sure we're all on the same page that this commission can and should be play a role in the process as the General Assembly starts to evaluate different directions that it may or may not want to go down.
Yes, my intention in this section was just to clarify the role moving forward of the consultant and that expanded capacity to bring in additional perspectives to inform that work. So it was a reframing and an editing, but was not intended to be a substantive change.
Thanks, Zoe. I just want to add in too, I think it's kind of I appreciate that explanation, Zoe, because the flip side, frankly, of if we are saying the General Assembly has created this commission with good intent, here's the role we can and should play. The opposite side of that comment, which is not written this way, but the opposite end of that would be if the General Assembly or if there is not an intention to use this commission, then someone should state that. So this commission doesn't do parallel work. That I think would be concerning. I think that we are saying this commission is an important piece of this work and can seek input in a way that the General Assembly can't. And I think that part of Nicole's question, or maybe this is now my question based on Nicole's, what she's saying is, let's make sure that we're in agreement about that. John.
Thank you, Megan. Again, back to the recommendations I had made. I recognize with our short amount of time here, it's not realistic to necessarily dive into analyzing and considering whether they're valid. I will certainly first and foremost recognize that most of those were the same recommendations put forward by the VSA, VASBO, and VSBA earlier this fall. Some of them were obviously other things considered in the brainstorming. I just wanted to be somewhat illustrative of the idea of some concrete recommendations or actionable recommendations. I very much approve and accept the recommendations that we do have listed. I do think we are likely to have some level of scrutiny around our inability to offer up, specific recommendations. And I understand, tax relief is different than cost containment. And I understand, from our perspective, the limited amount of time we have and the intersection with the school budget process limits our ability to suggest things that can have an impact on the FY26 budget process. But anyway, I just wanted to at least provide those as concrete examples of what I thought might be reasonable.
Thanks, John. Mike?
I had that statement circled as well that Nicole asked Zoe about. And I agree with Zoe. The intent that doesn't necessarily fit in that paragraph, but I'm wondering if we could make a statement as our closing, extending that offer to work and provide input during this upcoming session. I think that would be kind of a nice closing to our recommendation and preliminary report. So to take that and restate it again at the very end of the document.
Thanks, Mike. Jeff?
Yeah, I'm gonna, this is not gonna be, this is probably not gonna be well received, but I do think that we need a delay here. These changes that Zoe's recommended last night are sizable and significant. And so, for example, in that paragraph we just looked at on the screen, there's actually something that's not right as far as I know. It says the commission has contracted with somebody. I don't know that to be true. And in fact, on the subcommittee that I serve, we've been engaged in that work and we haven't contracted with somebody yet. So I, this is one example of something that's not accurate in that document. I don't believe. And so I think we need some time to look at these comments, these suggestions, these edits, and as Mike just did, go through them a little bit and make sure that we say them well. And in 12 hours that we've had this document, I haven't looked at it until this morning, and I'd like some time to look at it. And so I think we need a delay to give ourselves 24 hours at least to look at this document. There are some significant edits in there.
So I'm just going to do a quick clarification. The referencing a contract, that would have been my original language. That was not Zoe's change. And it is, I mean, we can certainly say has initiated the contracting process. I'm going to let Zoe and then Peter go. I think, Jeff, I think the motion that's going to get put on the table is going to be to accept or not accept the report. I am not convinced that a delay, because we've already, frankly, gone past our agenda. So Zoe and then Peter, and
just to clarify, Megan, actually it is, well, I'm showing in the document, those are additions that Zoe made last night, and says as such, which is existing language, and then added is the commission has contracted with a consultant. I don't know that to be true, and I don't think it is true.
I think what I'm saying, Jeff, is anytime Zoe touched that sentence, it's going to show up as her. You can look at my previous versions. For a while, I had a placeholder because we didn't know if we had a name move forward. We're in that process. We can certainly make that clarifying. Zoe, go ahead.
I appreciate the questions, and I was certainly coming at these revisions from a different perspective. My framing in this section was to really think critically around the role for the commission to provide input on future policy recommendations. And I was trying to create the tie-in from the work that we've done through the Listen and Learn Tour and that transition to the commission's work. So I think through the Listen and Learn Tour, we've been able to provide an understanding of our current education system and surface some initial priorities from the community around education, but not around specific policy proposals. So in thinking about this and the role of the consultant, there could be opportunities as specific policies are being entertained that this could be a mechanism to provide more direct feedback around policy considerations. So that's how I was looking at this in terms of threading the needle between some of the work that's already been done and then looking forward to the role of the consultant. Certainly, I think if there's a tense issue, that would be something to change if we are still going through the process of finalizing that contract. But that's my understanding from our discussions, is that is the intent.
Thanks, Zoe. Peter, and then John,
Uh,
and then
Yeah, I appreciate the intent here. That one sentence that we say has been deleted sort of puts it, this all sort of says we recommend that the General Assembly use the commission. That sentence makes it very clear as a recommendation. And I would agree with Mike, sort of summing that up at the end would be, I think, very clear and very helpful as a member of the General Assembly.
thanks, Peter. John?
My apologies for asking this. It might have been explained and I missed it, but I'm going back to page 9 where the preliminary data findings. Is that all language we're considering adding at this point?
Yes, and just to clarify, we had asked, that actually came out of 2 meetings ago, I believe. No, it might have been at the December 2nd meeting. The original version, I had pulled out a few bullets, and Zoe had at that meeting graciously volunteered to say, let's summarize those. So that is what we are talking about. Is there something in there that you're unsure about?
Yes. There's a number of things, but again, with 7 minutes to go, I'm not looking to sabotage our process, but I do feel like that's a lot of information to be added to this document that we didn't have time to consider until the last 12 hours. And I feel like I've started to try to read that in between our discussion this morning, but haven't given it, sort of due process. But I do feel like there's some points in there that I have reservations about, especially in terms of reference around, the other information that it refers to that I have questions about. So anyway, I don't know what to do with that at this point, but I do feel like there was a lot added at the last minute. I certainly have made recommendations at the last minute, but I do wonder whether we have enough time to fully consider that language.
So again, I'm gonna, I hear you, John, for sure. I also want to make it really clear for the public, the original version of that, which this commission has seen at least since December 2nd. We acknowledge that some of the findings in the agency's education funding report are very relevant to this work and made sense. And my original draft simply pulled out 3 bullets that I asked for support in fleshing out. Zoe has fleshed them out. It comes directly from the education funding report and state profile report that were already referenced. So I just want to make clear, I'm not convinced that it's new information. It's pulling out information, and we did ask for that to be done. Nicole, I'm going to let you go ahead, and then I think we may be at a place where we, I think, should entertain a motion to adopt or not. Nicole, go ahead.
I was just going to sort of reiterate the point you made, Megan, in that this is not new data. This is data that we have already reviewed as a commission and was responsive to very, very high level statements that you made in the original draft that we asked for some more levels of specificity. I had just one piece of feedback that I'm happy to share directly offline in terms of wording. But I don't think it's this commission's role to evaluate whether data is correct, or I don't think we have the capacity to do that, whether it's correct or not. I mean, we've reviewed it, we've asked questions, the field has been given an opportunity to provide feedback and input in errors they see in the data. So I'm just not clear what additional time would allow us to do in terms of evaluating the data on our own. I think the pieces that have been selected here are consistent with what's in the report, what's in the reports and the information that's been shared to date.
Okay, John, is that a leftover hand? Sorry, I don't mean to, I want to make sure. Okay, perfect. So I think I would like to entertain a motion so that we can put it on the table. If people have final comments, we can add that during the discussion. But I believe I would entertain a motion to adopt the draft report with the draft report that came out, the most recent one that came out last night, with an updated data findings, the removal of the edited chart, but a link to the live working document framed as that most recent. That's a very, that's not a very concise motion, but if someone wants to make an attempt, Jay.
Well, and also including the comment at the end that Michael and Peter
Thank you.
talked about. Yeah.
About the role of the commission.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Craig?
And I think I might be asking a very similar clarifying question. We're doing this while also knowing the steering committee is going to do some final touches to these general last minute changes we're talking about.
Thank you. That should be part of that should be reflected in the motion. Yes. So
Okay.
people are comfortable with that.
I'll go ahead and make the motion that we adopt the draft report with the inclusion of a link to the working document framed with the appropriate language, with the addition of a recommendation for the legislature to, a clear recommendation for the legislature to use the commission in its ongoing work, and pending any small wording changes by the steering committee.
Thank you, Peter. Do I have a second?
I'll second, and then I have a question.
Thank you, Jennifer. So there's a motion on the table and a seconded question and discussion from here.
So are we also going to consider any succinct recommendations? I think both John and Oliver had raised that as possibilities, or are we not?
I think because members, someone can tell me if this is incorrect, but I think we are not entertaining anything beyond those two bullets simply because we would not have time to discuss the inclusion. I know from past conversations, there are folks that have feelings about several of them. So I think it's just the two that are in here. Jeff.
So are we, the edits we got last night, are they included in Peter's motion? I'm not clear.
Yes.
Okay.
Other discussion. Hearing none, I'm gonna do a roll call vote for this one. I don't know why your faces move around, so I promise I'm not doing this, but Craig, you're now next to me on my screen.
Okay. And the motion is the edits from last night, plus steering committee working on these pieces that we have discussed need to be worked on before finalizing.
Yes, and the working document linked, but not typed.
Okay, I'm a yes.
Okay, Nicole,
Yes.
Jennifer,
Yes.
John,
No.
Peter,
Yes.
Zoe,
Yes.
Oliver,
No.
Jeff,
No.
Jay,
Yes.
Mike,
Yes.
Elizabeth.
Yes.
So I believe the ayes have it. Maureen, can you just do a count? I believe there's 4 no's.
You have
For the
8
record.
yeses and 4 no's.
Okay, so the motion carries. Thank you, everyone. I would just say, and as final comments, it's a really difficult timeline. I think we've articulated that very well. I actually look forward to being able to dive in and speak substantively about the actual policy recommendations. I think that is what the steering group will do in addition to any wordsmithing that needs to happen. But really the steering group is going to turn its attention to what do our next several meetings look like? How do we organize ourselves to get to some of these bigger conversations? Jeff, and then I'm going to open and adopt for public comment.
Sure. I just want to be clear. I voted no because I'm concerned about the edits that Zoe gave to us last night, not having enough time to review those. For the rest, but for that, I probably would have voted yes. But I think the edits that we got late last night deserve greater attention. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Okay, we are past time, but I will open it up for a brief public comment if there are members of the public. I see Chelsea. Chelsea, why don't you start? Others, if you are interested, please raise your hand.
Thanks, Megan. Chelsea Myers, Executive Director of the Vermont Superintendents Association. Very briefly, there was discussion of short-term cost containment at this meeting, including making recommendations on what growth should be permitted this year. I have two primary concerns about this. One is that local school officials are currently working with inaccurate budget data, particularly long-term weighted ADM. Let me be clear, this is not new and not meant to place blame on anyone. However, it is having very real and tangible impacts on budget modeling and decision-making at the local level currently. The volatility of the data contributes to losing public trust and making decisions based on one data set, which can significantly change in an instant. Sometimes when the budget process is too far in process to pivot. As you all know very well, these choices have a ripple effect across the entire system. For example, I've heard just this last week that a district is thinking of making considerable changes to their original plan because their numbers are looking quite good. My concern there is that the numbers are currently pretty volatile, but it exemplifies how decision making is impacted by constantly evolving and changing data. Second, recommendations or enforcing uniform growth parameters contributes to further fiscal inequities. We currently have a range of around 10,000 to 18,000 per equalized pupil spending. Let's not perpetuate these inequities with haphazard recommendations to uniformly curb growth. Thank you.
Thanks, Chelsea. Margaret McLean.
You're on mute, Margaret. You're still muted.
Margaret, we'll give you another minute. If not, I'd invite you to submit your comments in writing and we can make sure they're part of today. There we go. Oh, you were unmuted for a second. Go ahead, Margaret. Okay, I think sounds like you're having audio problems. Sorry about that. I'd welcome you to submit your comments in writing. So commission,
Now? Can
Yes.
you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. The Finance Subcommittee brainstorm isn't, I believe, a brainstorm of the full commission. And as stated by Oliver, it doesn't include concrete suggestions voiced by the public, as no public comment has been discussed by the commission. Reviewing public comment for actionable ideas should happen, as should brainstorm ideas from the full commission. For example, the request to independently evaluate Act 46 is one of the many public comments that would provide useful data to the commission and directly impact several ideas currently on the brainstorm list. I would urge the commission to please connect the work between the subcommittee, the commission, and the public, and widen perspectives as a choice moving forward rather than narrow them. Thank you.
Thanks, Margaret. Ethan, what? I'll let you
Just a
pronounce
quick-
your last name.
Yes, Weinstein. Just a quick clarifying question. I only heard 3 no votes from Jeff Fannin, John Castle, and Oliver Olson. I was hoping you could clarify who the 4th no vote was.
I think that's a good question. I think we're missing a commission member, so the math there were 8 yes votes. I think there were only 3 and there was 1 person missing.
I have 8 yes votes and no votes from Jeff Fan and John Castle and Oliver Olson, and I don't have a record for Megan voting, so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. I am happy to voice my support. The vote is over and chair typically does not vote unless I need to, but I am in support of the report that we are moving forward. So for the record. Okay. I believe we are adjourned. It's 10:07. We're a little late and there is a steering group meeting that I'm going to suggest. Why don't we jump on that call at, I'm going to say 10:15. I realize that is late, but it gives people a chance to stand up. So we will, anyone who's joining the steering group meeting, it is going to begin at 10:15. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.